So we have 4 mic runners, and we have a question already up here in the back right.
Hi, thank you, Madam Secretary. My name is Cheyenne Ellis, and I'm an American here living in Copenhagen. Prior to moving to Denmark, I worked in Washington, D.C. at the Department of State, along with Ambassador Susan Jacobs on parental child abduction cases. However, today my question is on gender imbalance in the workplace. Recently, the EU has proposed to initiate mandatory quotas to ensure more women are represented in top management positions in European businesses. Do you feel a quota system is necessary to increase more female CEOs, or do you feel like this is a self-regulating issue which needs no policy intervention?
Well, Cheyenne, that's a question I've wrestled with for a long time, and I don't think that there is a right answer to that question, because there does seem to be a glass ceiling in nearly every society. Not all of them. I think that you now have a woman prime minister, you have a woman head of state. I'll be going to Norway and Sweden and Finland, all of whom have had women in the very top positions in government. But even in those 4 countries, there's not that level of representation on a sustained basis in the corporate world. So is there some intervention that could encourage businesses to look more broadly to recruit women? I'm sure that there could be. Whether it's quotas or whether quotas are the right answer, I will leave that debate to the Europeans to decide whether it's right for them. But certainly it's been our experience that it still is more difficult for women to make it to the top in either politics or business in our country. The United States would never go for quotas, but I think there has to be a recognition that in the absence of a much more self-conscious outreach for women to be on corporate boards, in the pipeline for corporate leadership positions, it's not likely to change. So I'm hoping that as we experiment with this in different parts of the world, we will learn more. And if the EU adopts quotas, I will be very interested in seeing how that works, or whether it is unsuccessful because people just flat out resist it. I hope, though, that we can finally get over what has been a historic gender imbalance in both politics and business, because I think in the 21st century, women's empowerment is one of the most important goals for the world to aim toward.
Thank you for that answer, Madam Secretary. Let's go to the front left. Ingrid, please.
Hi, my name is Mads. I wanted to ask you, for a student of international affairs and global politics, where do you believe a future in these areas lie for us? Will it be in the UN or in the national stage, or maybe in the NGOs? I guess the question is also, in which institutions do you think the future of political or global politics will be shaped?
Well, I'm glad you're interested in these areas, and I think there are futures in all 3 of what you said. I think the multilateral organizations are in great need of reform, and young people need to be committed not only to a career but to a reform agenda within the institutions, because I think that they haven't kept up with the times. I don't think that they operate as efficiently as they could. They get too bureaucratic, too weighted down by internal process instead of external results. I think NGOs are a lean, mean way often of intervening, of making your voices heard. One of my goals is to promote civil society in places that have never known civil society, and to make it legitimate, to convince governments that having people who advocate for the environment, or for children with disabilities, or for the arts, or for electoral reform is an essential part of the democratic process. And then government, obviously, I believe strongly that if we're lucky enough to live in a vibrant democratic society, you can either be totally apathetic, which then leaves the decision making to people who may disagree with you completely. Or you can be an active citizen, participant in politics, or you can even go so far as being active in a political party and running for office. It's hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not easy being in politics anywhere in the world today, in any democracy. But I certainly hope that a lot of young people like yourself will look at that third alternative as much as the first two.
Madam Secretary, if you were 18 again, living in the world as of today with all the economic instability and uncertainty, what would you choose to do for a living?
That's a great question. Well, you know, I became a lawyer and I practiced law and I did a lot of work on behalf of defending children, abused and neglected children, and working for legislative change on behalf of children. And I always find myself attracted to trying to work on behalf of those who are marginalized or left out. So I would probably do the same thing, I've started NGOs, I've served on the boards of large NGOs and helped to direct them, and I think there will always be a voice, even in privileged societies like ours, for those who are voiceless. And so I like feeling that maybe I can, help make a difference in someone's life. And then the work around the world is a full agenda, particularly on behalf of women and children. So I think I'd probably be doing something in that area, which is what I was doing before I got into politics.
Let's go to row 3 here, please.
First of all, it's a huge honor, Madam Secretary. My name is Anna. I'm a PhD fellow in American Studies, and I have a question about Syria. Of course, one of the reasons why the operation in Libya went so well was because you had the support of other Arab countries. What role do you think Arab countries will play in the solution of the Syrian problem? And also, you say that the Russians are the main problem, why there's not a solution in the international community at this point. Are there other sort of regional and national differences between Syria and Libya that makes it difficult to intervene?
That's a great question. There are certainly significant differences. Syria is much larger. It's a much more diverse society, so that different groups within Syria are worried about what comes after Assad and are not unified in the way that Libya became. There is a professional military. There was not in Libya. Gaddafi relied on a very small group of military personnel augmented by mercenaries. There was an opposition in Libya that did represent the country. That's not been yet possible in Syria. We've all been working to try to promote that. There was a safe haven that could be operated out of, that Benghazi became, and then you could move west. The air defenses in Syria are significantly tougher than Libya. The Arab League called for action by the Security Council. The Arab League has supported the Kofi Annan mission. They haven't been united to call for military action yet. And most importantly, the Security Council, in the case of Libya, was willing to act, and then NATO could put together a coalition that was augmented by Arab countries willing to fly the no-fly zone, even carry out strikes. So really, those conditions do not exist with respect to Syria as of yet. There's also a lot of regional difficulty or complexity that has to be dealt with. Jordan is right on the border of Syria. they have to worry about their own territorial integrity and safety. Turkey has that long border. They worry about whether they make themselves more vulnerable to the Kurdish terrorist threat that they are so focused on. You go down the line, it's quite a difficult set of factors to balance. It's next door to Lebanon, which, as you know, fought a brutal civil war all those years, and the demographics of the population are not so dissimilar, except in terms of numbers, but the basic demographics are quite similar between the two countries. We've already seen the conflict wash over into Lebanon. And a lot of people are trying to figure out what could be an effective intervention that wouldn't cause more death and suffering. And in Libya, partly because it was a small population in a vast expanse, much of it not particularly populated, there was a theater for intervention that was quite successful in avoiding civilian casualties. That seems much more difficult, if not impossible. Now, we're thinking about all of this. There's all kinds of both civilian and humanitarian and military planning going on, but the factors are just not there.
You ask very good question, guys. Thanks for doing my job so well. Let's go to the far back left.
Hi, my name is Heidi. I study information management, and I have recently applied for an internship at MoMA in New York, and that made me research a bit about the American education system. We have a really good one here, but don't you find that you leave a big part of the American youth on the ground because they can't afford, or their parents can't afford to give them an education?
I think it's one of our biggest domestic challenges. Now, historically, our public education system worked well enough for the vast majority of Americans, and a relatively small percentage of Americans went to college. But by the end of the 20th century, and certainly now into the 21st century, the disparities in education between our most privileged young people and our poorest has gotten much broader. And the cost of going to college has skyrocketed. So we have increasing numbers of young people who are coming out of college with huge debt. And it's really regrettable, and there has to be a reckoning about this, because we're not, in my view, providing the best education we should for children who are not in the best of circumstances, and we make post-high school education very expensive, and we don't have enough of the right sort of skills training, because one of the great ironies in our current economic situation is you can see job postings for thousands of jobs, but we don't have the people in the places with the skills to take the jobs. So we have to close that gap, and it's something that I care deeply about. I know President Obama does as well, and we're going to see what more we can do from the federal government. Although, the final thing I would say on this is, much of education starts in the family and requires a combination of encouragement and discipline that families have to provide. And then our education system in public schools is run by local and state governments. So our complicated federal system makes change more challenging, but we have to figure out how we're going to do it.
Okay, Ingrid, let's go to the front row, middle, please. Be careful not to break a leg. Please.
Hi, my name is Signe, and I study law at Copenhagen University. My question is about the International Criminal Court. your husband, Bill Clinton, he signed the Rome Statute in 2000, but the Bush administration later unsigned it. You seem to have a rather positive approach to the ICC, so my question is whether you plan to re-sign and ratify the Rome Statute during your time as Secretary of State.
Well, I do think that the ICC is an important tribunal, and I thank you for noticing that we have, in the last 3.5 years, increased our involvement with the ICC. The head of our legal department at the State Department is a renowned international lawyer, the former dean of the Yale Law School, and we have promoted more exchanges, more discussions, but at this point we know that there would be no appetite in our Congress under current circumstances to ratify America's membership. So short of that, we're going to continue to do what we can to support the important work that the ICC does.
Madam Secretary, I would like to squeeze in a little question that we also got from a lot of our viewers. We asked on Facebook that they could ask you questions, and thousands of people around the globe, especially women, see you as a role model because you have had a remarkable career. You were the First Lady, you've been the Senator for New York, and now you're the Secretary of State. Can you tell us a little thing about how has this journey been for you, personal?
Well, personally, it's been a surprise because when I was sitting where you would be sitting, I never imagined that I would marry someone who'd become a president, or that I would be a senator from New York, or that I would be a Secretary of State. So my journey has been not only surprising, but very gratifying to me. And people ask me all the time if I have any advice, and it's hard to put yourself in anyone else's shoes, but I think for both young men and young women, to go back to the previous question, education remains such a passport to any option that you might decide to choose. And it doesn't always have to be conventional education. I know very successful people. Bill Gates obviously dropped out of Harvard, but he was always learning, and he was always alert, and he was always taking in what he was interested in, and was able to channel his passion into creative innovation. So staying involved and aware of what's going on around you. I also always hope that people develop some sense of social responsibility, that if you're fortunate enough to be educated, healthy, living in a democracy, having more control over your own life, although it probably doesn't seem like it from time to time, than the vast majority of people who've ever lived in the history of the world have had, then what can you do to give back as well as get ahead? And for young women, I think that the historic questions remain. I mean, how can you have a life and make a living? How can you have relationships? How can you have children and be active in whatever you choose? And it just takes a lot of focus and a decision that you're going to live your life in a way that meets your aspirations to the best of your ability. And then life happens. In my case, I walk across the lounge of the Yale Law School and hear some guy saying, not only that, we grow the biggest watermelons in the world. And I said, who is that? And the friend I was with said, well, that's Bill Clinton. He's from Arkansas. That's all he ever talks about. And I'd never been to Arkansas, obviously. This was all new to me. And so I took a leap of faith. And I think it's worked out pretty well. But it's, it has been because of choices I made. I tried to be the lead actor, if you will, in my own life. and not to be a bit player and not to let things happen to me, but to try to decide how I was going to respond to whatever happened. And you know, you just keep moving forward every single day.
Later, I'm going to ask you where you're going to move to.
Oh.